factor in that regard. I've listed a number of supplements that I have found and that are very well researched on here, and the cameras are picking up so that you can hopefully write some of these down. Fish oil, a really good study that just recently came out. Of 32,000 participants showed a 19 to 45% reduction in cardiovascular events. Heart attacks, strokes, things regarding the cardiovascular system. 3 to 4 grams of fish oil lowered triglycerides in their study 20 to 50%. So I've been seeing a lot of physicians recommending fish oils. Make sure your fish oil is a really clean source, that it says on the bottle PCP and mercury free. Very, very, very important. Niacin is listed, can raise HDL, lower LDL. Vitamin C. There's a famous researcher out of Germany, a German researcher, and basically he found that using high dosages of mineral ascorbate vitamin C lowers cholesterol by increasing HDL carriers to remove those cholesterol serums or cholesterol out of the body. They also prevent oxidation and restore the vascular system flexibility because it helps with the collagen matrix as well. Other things, apple and grapefruit pectin, bind to fats. Garlic, clinical study on 400 to 500 milligrams twice a day, lower cholesterol 9 to 12%. Lecithin, fat emulsification in the vascular system. Help to remove some of the cholesterol buildups. And then there's other things such as polycosanols, artichoke extract that lower cholesterol. There are many, many other things like cinnamon and other types of supplements that can help lower cholesterol. So looking at the variety, I'm just giving you a few here so that you can research and make a determination, and then addressing those issues about that vascular inflammation and the cholesterol buildups. This is the informational portion of our show. Next, we'd like to present you with the fitness section. Hi, welcome to the fitness portion of Fit and Healthy Today. I'd like to show you a few exercises that may help with balance, with hip flexor strength. First, I'd like to start with balance. I see a lot of my customers, particularly as they grow on in senior years, having issues with balance. This is a kind of a modification of a yoga pose called the mountain pose, and if you can have a chair handy or something to secure yourself if you're not quite full in balance. And what it does is you bring your leg up to your knee and you hold that, and then you do your best to remove your hands and try and balance and hold that for 30 seconds to a minute. And then of course changing sides, getting that balance as well. Balance is very important for prevention of falls, particularly as we grow older, or just balance period for overall being able to perform everyday acts as well. When we're talking about strengthening or worrying about inner thigh areas, I have a lot of my particularly female customers complain about the little flabbies going on here in the inner thighs. What we do is we do something called a duck squat. And the feet get turned outward and we put the legs apart, and this is kind of like an old ballet plie, and it used to go like this. But what you do is you turn your feet out and you go down, and you can hold on to your trusty chair if you're unsteady, and back up. And you squeeze the rear end when you come back up again. And down and back up again. What that does is that hits the inner thigh area and hopefully will tighten some of those muscles in that inner thigh area and give you additional inner thigh strength. As far as hip flexors, I want to show you a few exercises for strengthening your hip flexors. I see this a lot with unsteadiness with seniors and with people who tend to have weight problems, and if we can help strengthen those hip flexors, it can increase the mobility of them and the balance of them. And as a trainer, these were a couple of the exercises that I showed. Okay, you get on the floor, you keep your back nice and flat and nice and straight, and all you're going to do is you're going to just kick out to where your leg is straight and bring it back, and then kick out and bring it back, like 10 or 15 repetitions on each side of the body. a couple of times, maybe 2 or 3 times a week to try and strengthen. And then also working on the side flexors. Keeping the back nice and straight and looking straight ahead as best as your balance will allow you. The hip flexor motion and mobility, that will help strengthen that area or just make it a little bit more flexible. That concludes our fitness portion of the show. We next move on to our informational research analyst, Ralph Turchiano. Hi, welcome to the research portion of our show. Today, Ralph Turchiano will be presenting the latest, greatest research available. Ralph?
Yes. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss a little bit of the research, but also some concerns about those of us which are in charge of taking care of our health. But first, I'd like to open up with the first one. Artificial butter from popcorn and other sources seems to create some issues, at least in animals right now, especially the microwave popcorn, containing a chemical called diacetyl. Now what it does, it seems to cause obliterative bronchitis, meaning what ends up happening is fibrous tissue builds up in the lungs, which you cannot expel through coughing. It is a concern, and the main concern here is to try to pressure manufacturers of this artificial butter to change their sources. Very simple to do. Until then, if people had asthma or any other respiratory problems or concerns, the best thing I could recommend doing is avoiding artificial butter until manufacturers do address those concerns. It's just not worth it. After that, some interesting research from England and also basically in correlation with Cardiff University in regards to black tea. Now, we live in a pretty safe environment, but if there ever was a curve where an anthrax breakout should happen, they discovered that black tea works very well in inhibiting anthrax activity. Now, the catch here is this: it has to be black tea. It cannot be black tea mixed in with milk. They found out that milk cancels out the polyphenol effects of that black tea. That article was published in the March issue of the Society of Applied Microbiology journal for microbiologists, which I found quite interesting. After that, we go on to something which really involves our children. Now, interesting enough, they started adding a supplement to some children's diets upon birth to see how they fared. It was vitamin D. And this is another big feather in the cap for vitamin D itself. What appears is when vitamin D is given to young children, the chance of developing type 1 diabetes drops down by about 29%. Now, this indicates a couple different things. One, that maybe type 1 diabetics, or type 1 diabetes I should say, is not an inevitability based upon genetics. There may be genetic predisposition, but there may be other factors involved. And two, that if you add vitamin D to a child's diet, then depriving vitamin D of that child's diet can also result in these conditions. Meaning, is type 1 diabetes a nutritional issue, or is it just basically a biological issue which is unavoidable? Well, after this study where vitamin D was added to their diet in that substantial reduction, they have to relook at this issue again. And that was basically some interesting reporting, as opposed to some other local news channels which decided to say that children do not need multivitamins without basing it upon any credible information or data. Now for some really good reporting, which I have to give credit to the Associated Press on this one. This was good old-fashioned investigative reporting. It comes down to our water supply and being contaminated with pharmaceuticals. Now the catch is this: it's not so much the contamination of pharmaceuticals. We can easily say, hey, you know what? We were unaware. We are going to try to work to fix this problem. That's not what concerns me. What concerns me more than anything else is basically the contaminated thinking that revolves around this subject of our water supply, one of our primary, necessary, can't do without resources that you need for life. What we saw here is politicians, researchers, and business leaders try to dodge the bullet on this one totally, with total disregard for public whatsoever, information-wise, testing-wise, or otherwise. So basically what we found out was this, and I'm going to give you a few quotes, which you'll find quite interesting. Keep in mind, we started understanding that our water supply was contaminated back from 1999. Then John Hopkins, back in 2002, said, quote, that these pharmaceuticals are not rendered biologically harmless. And they said, quote, also, we may be able to tolerate them for a short period of time, but that doesn't mean they won't hurt us or developing fetuses or aquatic organisms at higher concentrations over a long period of time. They knew this for about 5 years. But when they finally began testing, what do we find out? Well, the AP reported, there are plenty of reasons offered for the secrecy: concerns about national security, fears of panic, a feeling the public will not understand, even confidentiality agreements. What's there to hide? And what you find out as you begin to research this article a little bit more, providers are not, however, required to tell people if they find a contaminant that is not listed in the U.S. EPA agency, and there are no pharmaceuticals on that EPA list. Well, listen, what would you do? Think about this. What would you do if you had a babysitter and they said your child ate some bad food, but would not tell you what it is, how much they ate, or when they ate it? That's a responsibility. And yes, government does sometimes work in a paternalistic form, but this one is unbelievable. Let's go through one quote which I cannot understand, and I'll actually give you a couple of quotes. The one quote I cannot understand is one from one individual who found out his water supply was contaminated, Mayor Robert Chuck. What did he say? Let's look at the logic of this afterwards too. Mayor Robert Cluck, said a trace amount of one pharmaceutical had survived the treatment process and had been detected in drinking water. He declined to name the drug, saying identifying it could cause a terrorist to intentionally release more of it, causing significant harm to residents. After that, he followed by saying, I don't want to take that chance. There is no public hazard, and I don't want to create one. Now you think about that. If there's no public hazard to the medication that's contaminating the water supply, then who cares what a terrorist does with it? You cannot use the logic, well, if I tell you what's poisoning you, then the terrorists win. Basically begins to make you really rethink who your friends are on this issue. And then it goes on to 2. We are not putting out more information than we have to put out, said Rhodes. How about that? Now, Rhodes also worked for one of the businesses that's basically purify our water. And he responded not just in a regular way, but he incited. After that, basically they found out, the AP, that people do not have to say where they obtained the water samples, what water samples are contaminated, or how much they're contaminated by. Stating confidentiality agreements which they make with the plants, which say that you allow us to test the water, but we can't tell you. But let's end with this one quote. That was basically from one of my favorite quotes from Peter Rogers, Harvard University professor of environmental engineering. He said, quote, and remember, this is Harvard University again, I would stop those measurements right away, because if you measure something, it will get out, and people will overreact. I can just imagine a whole slew of lawsuits. If you test something, you may find it. Let's leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ralph, for your very informative information. This concludes our show. Thank you very much for joining us.